So I say we jump right into it with the history of the filibuster. What is it and where did it come from? So everyone's big question, what is the filibuster? The filibuster, simply put, is a Senate procedural tool that requires a supermajority of 60 senators to vote to end debate on a bill. Since the Senate allows for unlimited debate, which is something that I'll explain a little bit more later on, in practice, the 60 vote threshold serves as the minimum requirement for the passage of most bills in the Senate. We hear a lot about this 60 vote threshold. It's really just a vote to end debate. And then after that, once debate is ended, a normal vote is called. And as you would expect, majority rules in whether or not that bill passes. Something most people don't know is that the modern filibuster exists as a silent filibuster, meaning that there's no talking necessary in order to have a filibuster. You can simply send a text to the majority leader saying that you intend to filibuster, and it's done. And we just move on with regular business. There is no Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of hoopla about it. It's just over in an instant. That's how democracy dies. But in current terms, with this filibuster in place, all legislation or most of it will require the cooperation of 10 Republican senators in order to pass anything, since we're in a 50-50 split in the Senate. Where did the filibuster come from? So a lot of people think that the filibuster is written into the Constitution, but that is untrue. The filibuster was actually born in the early 1800s when the original Senate rules from way back to the founding of our country were overhauled, and the rule for ending debate with a simple majority was thrown out by mistake. You heard that correctly. It was a mistake. The filibuster is an accident. This rule's removal allowed for unlimited debate in the Senate. And once that started to be abused a little bit, in 1917, the Senate passed what is known as Rule 22, which established a threshold for ending debate. At the time, it was a 2/3 majority, so essentially 67 votes to end debate. And then in 1975, that was reduced to where we are now, the 60 vote threshold. The filibuster in our history. So the filibuster has appeared time and again as a procedural roadblock to progressive legislation. Nowadays, especially in the past like 10, 15 years, we're all very familiar with the filibuster being used to stop things like enacting common sense gun reform or adopting standards to combat climate change. But if we take a fuller view of our nation's history, the filibuster has been used to block one type of legislation more than any other, and that is voting rights legislation. It's like, this is a picture of Senator Strom Thurmond. The filibuster was used time and again during the civil rights movement to stall and kill bills meant to combat racial discrimination. Strom Thurmond holds the record for the longest single person filibuster when he decided to filibuster against the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which lasted for 24 hours and 18 minutes. If you look him up in an interview a little bit after, he was very proud to tell people that he wore a diaper in order to survive that long. It's like moving forward, the filibuster's history as a method to block civil rights legislation and kind of uphold white supremacy is really the crux of the reason that nowadays, especially, you're hearing it being referred to as a Jim Crow relic or the Jim Crow filibuster, Jim Crow 2.0, these kinds of things. So it's racial history is what's informing that moniker now. And unfortunately, right now, we are fighting the same fight that people fought in the 60s. It's either filibuster or voting rights in the Senate. It's like now, for a more modern view, I'm going to pass it off to someone who's significantly more exciting than myself. It's Reggie.
Thanks, Aubrey. Thanks for providing us with that history. I was going to say good history, but it's not necessarily the best history that we look at as far as the use and abuse of the filibuster. But now I want to kind of focus on what the filibuster is blocking today, and what has it gotten us, or what has it not gotten us. Go to the next one for me, Aubrey. Thank you. So opening up with a quote from Stacey Abrams. I'm sure all of us know her by name at this point. Voting rights are the most basic tenet of our democracy and the bare minimum one should expect from the government. Next one. So why is that important? If we look at what the GOP is doing, Republicans are doing at the state level, they're rolling back voting rights and actively making it more confusing or harder for those who are determined to vote and exercise that right to vote. So if we look at a report from the Brennan Center, since July of this year, 18 states have enacted 31 new laws that restrict access to the ballot box. Now, according to Brennan, this is, we can say, well, you can stay here actually. According to Brennan, this wave of restrictions on voting is the most aggressive that they've seen in more than a decade of tracking state voting laws. And it is in large part motivated by false and often racist allegations about voter fraud. As you can see, the turnout in 2020 sparked a lot of allegations of voter fraud that have been widely debunked. And then in addition to that, the new laws restricting voting access are not created equal. And so without getting too much into the substance of each state's bills, but for example, there are states where laws are mixed. So meaning they have pro-voter policies in there, but they also have policies in there that will restrict. So on the face, it might look good, but if you go in there and read them, that they're more hurtful to voters than helpful. All right, and then if we look at the state, or you can go back to the map. Thank you. So if we look at the map here, you might wonder like why these states are passing restrictive voting laws, and so I can't exactly give you an answer why, but I can theorize. And so my theory is that most of the states here that have passed restrictive voting laws, with the exception of Texas, Wyoming, and Montana, all the states here have a 2022 Senate race coming up. And so with the understanding of how powerful the Senate chamber is, it's important that whoever takes majority in the Senate moving forward in 2022 will have a lot of political power. And that's my theory on why we're seeing a lot of restrictive voting laws in these states specifically. All right, now we can go to the next one. Thanks, Aubrey. All right, so this is why we need federal action. However, the filibuster is being used and abused relentlessly to gridlock the Senate and prevent almost any legislation without 60 senators backing it from passing. It encourages the minority to vote in a block instead of allowing members to vote with their constituency. They are encouraged to unify around a position that caters to even the most extremes of the party. And Mitch McConnell, he has essentially said that he plans to obstruct the Biden administration as much as he can during this term. And so I also want to take the opportunity here to just touch on like the unrepresentative nature of the Senate chamber. And what I mean by that is that representation in the Senate is based on statehood rather than population. So to give you an example, there are roughly 40 million Californians and fewer than 600,000 Wyomingites. And I hope I'm saying that right. Each state has 2 senators. So the political power in the Senate of those in Wyoming is the same that of California, although there is a drastic difference in population in each of those states. So additionally, in the last Congress, when Republicans held 53 states compared to the Democrats' 47, that quote unquote majority represented 15 million fewer people. I'm sorry, that was my dog. Represented 15 million fewer people than the Democratic quote unquote minority. So if we put that in another way, 53 senators represented 48% of the population, whereas 47 Democratic senators represented 52% of that population. So as you can see, it's not only a minority of senators that are blocking the progress, but it's a minority of senators that are representing an even more minority of Americans. that are blocking pieces of legislation that is widely popular. All right, and so Mitch McConnell here, folks' best friend in the Senate, everyone's favorite. Just as a reminder, not only has Mitch McConnell pledged to focus on blocking this administration from doing anything, he has also changed the filibuster so that he could appoint justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. And this happened in 2017, where he basically invoked the nuclear option to end the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees. Again, and that was primarily to ensure the appointment of Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, but then that change actually helped appoint Kavanaugh as well as Barrett to that Supreme Court. All right. Now, unfortunately, it's not only Republicans that are standing in the way here. Joe Manchin and Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have also made statements that they will not support ending or reforming the filibuster by any means. As you can see here, a quote, "I will not vote to eliminate or weaken the filibuster." And then Senator Kyrsten Sinema, "The filibuster compels moderation and helps protect the country from wild swings between opposing policy poles." Interesting quote there. Now, I do want to point out, although Manchin has mainly been outspoken when it comes to being against filibuster reform, he has made some private statements to suggest otherwise. He has mentioned that the threshold to surpass, or as we mentioned earlier, the threshold for the filibuster is 60 votes. However, he has made statements to say that he could see it being lowered from 60 to 55. Again, don't know where these 60, 65, 67, these numbers come from. They're arbitrary to me, but I would assume that Joe Manchin feels that he could probably get 5 senators rather than 10. That would make it easier. But again, I just want to point out that what they say in public all the time might not be exactly where they stand, but these folks are definitely standing in the way as we speak right now. Next one. All right, so bipartisanship. Some folks think that the filibuster produces bipartisanship. Now, first, let's talk about what it is. Bipartisanship is consensus among the American people across party lines in support of or in opposition to legislation. What isn't bipartisanship? Whatever senators decide, it is by working together under the dome, often a unified party plus one member of another party. So too often we look to senators in order to gauge whether something is popular or bipartisan across the aisle. As polarization and obstinance has grown in Congress, we've seen that this twisted view of bipartisanship is able to produce little to no cooperation, and the filibuster provides no incentive to change this trend. So senators should be looking to the people in order to gauge legislative popularity and not to each other. So very popular legislation has little to no chance of passage because of this idea of bipartisanship. Okay, so let's bust some filibuster myths here. So some may say the filibuster is necessary. It encourages bipartisan cooperation. Straight party line votes only breed division. Now, when it comes to legislation that exists to protect and defend the rights of everyone, they exist despite the filibuster, not because of it. So civil rights bills were routinely killed due to the filibuster, and we continue to see the filibuster stop sensible reform bills from becoming law today, especially now. When only one party is willing to govern, it is important that the majority be able to do what it was elected to do, and that is govern. Now, if we look at the bills right now that a lot of folks are paying attention to, the bipartisan infrastructure bill as well as budget spending, this requires only 50 votes. Now, because this is a 50 vote requirement, it encourages Republicans to dive into negotiations and try to make the bills more conservative, and they often succeed. Now, the 60 vote threshold is so high that Republicans can block the bill outright. So they don't even bother talking or negotiating with Democratic colleagues because they know that they won't be able to get the 60 votes anyway. So with that understanding, the filibuster isn't promoting debate, it's actually stopping it. Okay, thank you. Another myth here: without the filibuster, Republicans will just undo whatever we do. We, as in whatever Democrats do when they get into power, or the filibuster will be the only thing protecting us if we become the minority. Now, if we look at examples here, so Republicans have tried numerous times to repeal the Affordable Care Act, roll back Medicare and Medicaid, reduce Social Security over the years, and they failed every time. The things Democrats want to pass now are very popular with the American people, and it doesn't stand to reason that Republicans will be able to repeal them without actually having some severe political consequences. And then also, we're of the philosophy that politics is not a defensive sport. When you have the power, you must not be afraid to use it. The window of opportunity to enact bold, necessary, and positive reforms is quickly closing. People are having their most fundamental democratic right, the right to vote, stripped away every day that the Senate Democrats do not act. Fealty to the filibuster is preventing Democrats from delivering on their promises. And if they both fail to deliver and allow Republicans to continue to undermine democracy as they please, Democrats will lose the majority and Republicans will eliminate the filibuster the moment it stands in their way. Now, let's go back to, I just want to touch on some things where the filibuster has changed. Again, as mentioned, in 2017, Mitch McConnell, he changed the filibuster to where you don't need it for Supreme Court nominees. In 2013, the majority leader at the time was Harry Reid, eliminate the filibuster on presidential nominees and not the Supreme Court. And then in the 70s, that's when the threshold went from 67 to 60. So it's changed multiple times, and it's not because it's not been as a reaction to one party's the other party's act, but it's more so been a proactive act to do a certain thing. So again, Mitch McConnell, he eliminated the filibuster so that he can put in more Supreme Court justices that would align with conservative values. All right, let's go to the next one. So let's look at some pieces of legislation that we assume to be blocked, or the For the People Act has already been filibustered once. But let's look at some. So the For the People Act here, if we look at the support here amongst all likely voters here across the political spectrum, you see that the support is 62 as opposed to a 25 opposition rate. And obviously, I mean, you have more Democratic support than Republicans, but overall, across the political spectrum, the For the People Act is very supportive by Republicans and Democrats. And again, these are the voters. These are not folks within the Senate. If we look at Supreme Court expansion, voters support increasing the size of the Supreme Court from 9 to 13. Now, it's not as the difference is not as big as the For the People Act, but as you can see, majority support rather than oppose Supreme Court expansion. And some may wonder, like, why 9 to 13? Easy way to explain that is that there are 13 circuits, and the Supreme Court justices should align with the number of circuit courts that we currently have. Next one. All right, DC statehood. Question here that voters were asked: would you support or oppose granting statehood to more than 714,000 people who live in Washington, DC, so that they can elect voting senators and representatives, just like Americans in every other state? And as you can see here, there is much support here for DC statehood across the political spectrum. Now, if we look at Medicare expansion, voters overwhelmingly support expanding Medicare to cover hearing, vision, and dental care. And this is very overwhelming. As you can see, 83% are for that, whereas 11 oppose. And this is legislation that the filibuster definitely block. The Equality Act. Voters support the Equality Act. So some lawmakers in Congress are proposing a bill that will expand the civil right. And I just want to give a brief here, talk about this here, just in case folks don't know. This bill will include protections against discrimination on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity in housing, the workplace, public services, and other areas of life. And as you can see, top line across the political spectrum here, there is a lot of support, whether it's strongly or somewhat, and not as much opposition for the Equality Act. Next one, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Again, for those that don't know, some lawmakers, are proposing a bill to increase accountability and reduce racial inequality in policing practices. So this bill will include reforms such as creating a national database of police misconduct, prohibiting racial profiling, banning the use of chokeholds, and requiring body cameras to be used by all police officers. And when voters are asked whether they support it, you can see 74% of voters across the political spectrum support it, as opposed to 21 that oppose it. So now, what's next? The only thing stopping us from enacting these changes, such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the PRO Act, and all the pieces of legislation I just went through, and setting America on a more equitable and just path, are unsound myths and the filibuster. So there's just one move to make here. Eliminate it. It was never meant to exist. It's only ever really been used to fight against equality. It's been changed 160 plus times in just the past 50 years, and getting rid of it only requires a simple majority vote, in the Senate. Democrats have that vote in the Senate, and Democrats just need the senators to be brave and bold enough to do that.